I think Roth is such a special place. Like, how do you capture the atmosphere of Roth when you're here? Because I've been here since Thursday, like a full week and a half, pretty much before the race, and stayed in a homestay where we're at right now. And you can't really describe how accommodating they are. Like, we've eaten their food, they're here, they just care about the race so much. There's somebody who lives like 50 meters away who's come by 3 times just to check on how we're doing and get like the feeling of Roth with the triathletes coming in. So.
Hey, I'm really him. Don't believe me? Come and see me. Got 3 wishes from my genie. Now I'm on your local TV. Y'all on tour, got demons. Say she wanna come and see me when I'm in a local city. I'm like, pause though. Please step aside so they can see me. And I walk up in this light. Yeah, I'm really him. Talking my shit like I'm really him. On God. Walk up in this light. Yeah, I'm really him. Talking my shit like I'm really him.
A little bit of flight drama, trying to cancel a bus segment from Munich to Nuremberg, and had the whole itinerary canceled at one point before it was reinstated. But got here, no issues, no stress. The trip itself was great, and got to the homestay here. Amazing people, super easy. They're super accommodating. Everything between food, whatever we needed, they would help get, and just made us feel like we're at home. And I was here a couple days before Jim came in. This was a big trip. He actually was always saying, you know, my first full distance race should be at Roth. It just so happened that, you know, Ironman Arizona a few months ago worked out better schedule-wise, and we just gave it a shot there. So this was the second one, but he said his biggest regret in his career is not racing here, so he wanted to be a part of it, help me prep, get a feel for the race, and was super key during the race, but even in leading up to it, and pretty much was able to chill most of the week and just get the training done, get in a couple of the last workouts, and then start the taper week. And having Jim here was really great because I was able to adjust on the fly with the taper, and he kind of was able to oversee everything, versus in some of the smaller races that we might do or some of the other races during the year, we'll be communicating by phone, but we only have about a few hour window every day here to kind of communicate with the US just with the time change. So awesome to have him here and have someone on the support team. And just leading into the race, felt laid back, a few race obligations, but I found the race to be, you know, super accommodating, and just found myself calm and ready to go on race day. There was a few key race events that they had going into it. We had the press conference, which we just attended just to end the pre-race briefing, which is all pretty standard. But then they also have this pasta party that's honestly the biggest pasta party in all of triathlon. It's thousands of people all in one room, and they have the pros there. They can call them up on stage and just get everybody excited for the race 2 days out. And the day before the race, I had nothing, but those few days before, it was just kind of showing up at some of those key events like that, just to, you know, help build the hype for the race. And the press conference too was just the biggest. They had translators for us that we could listen in German, and it was just a whole overview of the event and just the background behind it. Felix, the race director, talking and giving his insight into the race and addressing every single topic you could think of going into Roth, and just hearing from all of the athletes up on stage, having the questions asked, and just hearing about their expectations for the race for people who have done it and haven't, was just really cool to be a part of. The day before the race, always super chill, just 30-minute ride, 30-minute run with some activation stuff thrown in, bike check, which was pretty easy. Everything here is so efficient for having, you know, 3,500 or more participants plus relays on top of that, which is, you know, 700 to 1,000. So, you know, almost 5,000 people all doing the event. Everything moves super fast. Any line you were in just continued to move. Maybe that's German efficiency or just the exact efficiency of the race and how much of a well-oiled machine it is, but got through all of the pre-race logistics super smoothly. And then going into the race, same thing. Even with a bit of a traffic jam getting into the parking lot to get to the race site, it always kept moving. And I've been in a traffic jam before a race in St. George, where like before they decided to start doing buses, where you're at a standstill and just tons of cars there. But this was no stress everything kept moving. And honestly, this is the arena for triathlon. There's a bridge that overlooks the swim start, and there's just hundreds of people up on the bridge, thousands even, and all along the shore. And so starting the race was just this really cool atmosphere. You get to look around, and just there's no crowd like in Roth. It's absolutely incredible. The energy, you can almost feel it. And as you're going off, the gun started, we start the race, but you can just hear the crowd even as you're going when your head is in the water. It's just absolutely amazing. And really, to start my race, I'd say that maybe the swim dynamics, with it being a wetsuit and then a super long swim before the first turnaround, it was a little bit odd having everybody in one kind of line instead of this one right behind the other. We were all side by side for a few hundred meters before kind of settling in. And then, it honestly was a little bit like a race pack on the bike, because we all kind of took turns at the front between Sam Laidlow, Daniel Backegard, and myself. Each of us would pull for about a few hundred meters or so to just keep the pace high, because nobody wanted to start the bike with Magnus Ditlev or Patrick Lang, just to try and have some separation on them in the race. But I think with that long drawn out start before the first buoy, and just having it be a wetsuit swim, the pack stayed together. There was probably 7 to 10 of us all around there, and came out of the water, and Jim was right there. He's supposed to give me a gap to Magnus and Patrick, and he just had a big 0 with a line slashed through it. And I just looked over and was like, okay, well, that's how the day is gonna go, because nobody wants to start the bike with Magnus. And even Patrick, I think people don't always give him enough credit for how much of a good swimmer and biker he is. So when he does come out in the front pack and then rides like he does, people are always kind of shocked. But when I saw that, I kind of figured he would be a factor throughout the day. And I had a super fast transition, got out and got going. And that was the coolest part of, the very beginning of the race, because I was the first one to go over the bridge where that, 1,000 or so people were all cheering. And it was this tunnel of people just with sound coming from every direction. And it was almost disorienting. And that was the loudest sound that I heard up until later in the course on Solar Hill. But I led for the first, 10 to 15 minutes. And then Magnus came around. Sam followed soon after. And then Daniel came around me. And I had Patrick behind me, and then Peter Hemerick. And from there, it was just hanging on and just saying, the longer you can hang on to Magnus, the more gap you're gonna have to everybody else. And if I'm hurting, everybody else is hurting just as much. And that lasted for about 20K, and Magnus and Sam started to pull away. Daniel followed him. I heard that he lost contact and then came back on, and then he lost contact again. But it ended up just being me, Patrick, and Peter for the longest time through 40K. And we heard a time split to Magnus and Sam, and it was about 3 minutes already. And it was 2 minutes to Daniel. And my hope was that Sam was overriding with Magnus and it would pay for him on the run. And then Daniel was overriding and the same thing would happen. And he'd either come back to us on the bike, or later on in the marathon, he'd suffer, because the power that I was riding was comparable to a PTO or a half Ironman, race. It was like 330 watts for about 45 minutes to an hour. And it ended up being me, Patrick, and Peter just settling in for a while. By the time we hit Solar Hill, it was the 3 of us, and Patrick led up it. And just even the hill before Solar Hill, it's really hard to describe the crowds to anybody who hasn't been here, because triathlon doesn't get this sort of attention or the crowds that show up for this race. It's like not that triathlon's not a real sporting event, but it's a real sporting event with there were people dressed up, and I talked to the homestay about this too. They dressed up in a ghost costume, and they had whips on the hill before Solar Hill, and they were just standing there out of some medieval type scenario. And it was the weirdest thing, because I was trying to recover from the hardest effort you can imagine in an Ironman, and then just going uphill and seeing those, it was pretty surreal. And then you get to Solar Hill 5 minutes later, and it's literally everybody describes it, it's a wall of people, and the sea just kind of parts for you. and it's sound coming from every direction. They have a tower of speakers with the announcer just yelling into everybody's ear, and I couldn't like hear anything for a mile afterwards. And following Patrick up it was just insane because he's a German star. Like everybody loves seeing him. He was the first German athlete through, and so it was just, I can't even put into words. Like, you just have to experience it. It's like being in this frenzied crowd of people who have been like building up their excitement and all of a sudden just get to let it out. And we found Daniel at the top of the hill. Something was up. He said his gears died and we didn't know it in the race. And shortly thereafter, like, he dropped back with Peter. And from there on, it was just me and Patrick on the whole bike. And the second loop was a bit chaotic with all the age groupers, but we just managed to stay together, and we watched the gap grow to Magnus and Sam Laidlow and had no idea what the guys behind us were doing. But by the time we got off the bike, I knew, Patrick was, trying to run a 2:30. Magnus was 12 minutes up the road. Sam Laidlow was the big question on my mind of, can he run now after a bike like that? And I heard, the pack of Joe Skipper, Brad Weiss, Daniel Backegard, all were about 4 minutes back. And I just set off at my pace that felt good, that I thought I was capable of. I had a power in mind, which, it's kind of an arbitrary number, but 330 watts for me using the Stride power meter for the run. And then it ended up being about like 5:48 pace for the whole first 25K, and it's along this cinder path along the canal. And I didn't have, this limit set. I knew 5:45 would be the absolute max, which is a 2:30 marathon for that I was capable of based on the training that I had in my mind, but knew that I was capable of 2:40 or under. And the first half of the marathon is really pretty quick because it's flat. I'm a pretty rhythm runner, and that's pretty much what the whole canal is. And the second half is much more hilly through the town, and especially in the last 5 miles, it gets super hilly. But we weren't bringing back any time. Patrick was slowly gaining at the first 10K or so. He's 50 seconds, and then at the 18 or so K is like maybe a minute and a half. And then Magnus and Sam Laidlow were surprisingly keeping the same pace as me, and that surprised me a little bit because I knew Magnus was in good shape and run shape. He seemed confident, but Sam running with him as well after that bike, I was surprised. And I was running in fourth, and it's a long way to come for fourth place, and I kept telling myself third is better than fourth. But it took until about the 12 to 15K mark. And Jim, in this race, you're allowed to have a support person. So he was jumping from aid station to aid station, hand me water bottles, gels, give split updates. And eventually I heard at that like 15 or so K mark that Sam Laidlow was now at 7:45. And I remember yelling to him, like, he's mine. Like, I'm gonna go catch him, because if he dropped that much time and Magnus was staying the same gap, like, he was significantly slowing, cramping, or walking. And so I kind of knew he was gonna come back, and my attention also shifted to Daniel, and him and Joe Skipper had kind of traded off who was chasing me. And Daniel at that point had closed the gap to about 3 minutes and 30 seconds. So I was just doing math in my head of how many seconds per mile that is that he would have to run faster than me to actually catch me. And if I'm running at that point, 5:49, 5:50 average, he'd have to be running almost like 5:40 flat. So I was feeling more confident in that, but the real race really doesn't start until you hit, that 15 to 18 mile mark. And I just kept telling myself, they had the whole course marked in Ks, so I was converting back and forth, of course, in my head the whole time. Just get to the 30K mark and see how you feel. And if you really feel good, you can maybe push on. But if not, then you have to just try and hold on to what you have. And I was in third at that point. Magnus was, 11 to 12 minutes up the road. Patrick was slowly pulling away, and I had finally stopped Daniel from advancing, and he was about 4.5-ish minutes at that 18 mile mark, which is 30 Ks. And that's when it really started to hurt. Everywhere before, I was feeling pretty rhythmic and really pretty good. I was in third, Sam had walked, so super happy with where I was at, but that was the longest 8 miles of my career for sure, especially the last 5 miles. I'd ran the hills before in the race, or before training, just to get a feel for them. And they go so much easier when you're fresh, and they were just such a grind when everything was aching, and just literally kept counting down every half mile until the finish line, and just saying if I could get to 4 miles and have 4 minutes on Daniel, there's no way he can run like 1 minute faster than me per mile if I could just, you know, maintain a decent pace and just not go slower maybe than a 7-minute mile. So it was at that point I started to realize that I could make it. Definitely had 1 or 2 people say that he's coming, and that was like the worst thing you could have said to me, because then got me all nervous, and I was like, there's nothing that you want to hear more than he's like right there, but ended up not being. And then entering the stadium was, you know, if not first, a close second to Solar Hill. And yeah, that was just so much, you know, affirmation and confirmation of all the work we've done. Like the final full distance block, like actually trained for it, was 3rd place at, you know, behind 2 of probably some of the greatest long course athletes of all time, Magnus and Patrick. And just to race 7:37, 3rd place at Roth in my 2nd full distance. I mean, I came here and got everything I could have asked for, completely emptied the tank, questioned maybe all of my decisions about racing long distance in that final parts of the marathon. But I think if you're doing that, you're kind of doing something right, and that's exactly how you should race the Ironman, or full distance race, is to just get to that end. But you know, overall, I mean, this trip, I think that Challenge Roth is this grassroots family-based race, but just on the biggest scale. It has that feeling of what triathlon is all about, and I think that's why it draws such a big crowd here. People just understand it, and I think it's one of the absolute coolest events that you can do, and just super happy to be able to come here, perform, and be a part of such an amazing race that has so much history behind it. After this, I'm taking a little bit of a break, but not too long, because I'm racing PTO Milwaukee, Singapore, and then I'm racing the 70.3 World Champs in Finland. And then I'll also take a little bit of a break and plan the second half of my season. Yeah. Thanks for watching my YouTube. I mean, obviously like and subscribe if you like what you see. Keep following along, because we're gonna keep going after it.